He responded with techniques he couldn't name. A wrist lock that used her own energy against her. A foot sweep that utilized perfect timing rather than strength. A deflection that sent her blade harmlessly to the side while leaving her exposed. These weren't moves he'd learned in any training sim. They felt ancient. Practiced through countless repetitions in some other lifetime, the battle became a silent conversation. She would attack high, then low, testing his awareness. He would respond with blocks and counters that spoke of deep understanding. There was a rhythm to it now, a give and take that felt almost choreographed. The hostility had drained from the exchange, replaced by a strange kind of respect. She wasn't trying to kill him anymore. She was trying to understand him, to understand what he was. The energy blade hummed lower now, its light less intense. Her stance became less aggressive, more observational. She was studying him, cataloging his movements. He could feel her eyes on him, measuring, comparing what she saw against some internal database of combat styles. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to be finding it. The tension had shifted from life and death struggle to something more complex, something that felt like recognition. The spiral on his forearm began to pulse. A deep green light glowed through the fabric of his sleeve. It wasn't like a lamp or display. The light moved, swirling in the exact pattern of the mark he'd carried since birth. The emerald glow intensified, casting sharp shadows across the stone floor. Leora froze mid-swing. Her energy blade stopped inches from his neck. The hum of the weapon dropped to a whisper as her grip loosened. Her eyes locked onto the glowing pattern, widening behind the visor. The anger in her expression dissolved into shock, then something closer to reverence. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She lowered her weapon slowly, her arm trembling. The blade retracted into its hilt with a soft click. She took a half step back, her military posture giving way to something uncertain. Her gaze remained fixed on his arm as if seeing something impossible. Her breath came in shallow bursts that fogged the inside of her helmet. The glow wasn't biological. He could feel that now. The light came from beneath his skin, but it wasn't heat or blood. It was pure energy, clean and controlled. A signature. The pattern swirled like liquid light, precise and complex. It reminded him of quantum diagrams he'd studied, but alive. Conscious. Warmth spread up his arm, through his shoulder, into his chest. It felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. The connection was sudden and absolute. This mark wasn't his. It was something older, something that had been waiting. The warmth brought no pain, only certainty. He knew things without knowing how he knew them. Ancient things. The stone beneath his feet began to vibrate. A low hum rose from the amphitheater, matching the frequency of the light from his arm. The obsidian rings that formed the arena's floor started to glow with the same emerald light. Lines of energy traced patterns between stones that had seemed random moments before. The entire structure was responding to the mark on his arm. This was no coincidence. No random mutation or birth defect. The precision was too perfect, the timing too exact. The mark had brought him here, guided him through the warnings, through the defenses. It had known this place waited for him. Known he belonged here even when he didn't know it himself. The duel was over. Leora stood motionless, her weapon arm hanging limp at her side. The other sentinels had gathered at the edge of the arena but made no move to approach. They watched the glowing patterns on the floor, then at the mark on his arm. Their postures had changed from enforcement to observation. They were waiting now. Waiting to see what came next. The real confrontation was just beginning. Not with blades or threats, but with whatever truth that light represented. He looked from the glowing patterns on the floor to the amazed sentinels, then down at his own arm. The light pulsed gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. His heartbeat. Or something else's heartbeat shared through his skin. The questions came faster now, but beneath them was a strange calm. Whatever was happening, it felt inevitable, like remembering something he'd forgotten long ago. Leora whispered words he couldn't understand. The sounds were soft, ancient, shaped by a tongue never meant for human ears. Her helmet retracted with a hiss of equalizing pressure, revealing a face marked by pale scars and eyes that held too much history. She spoke again, slower this time, and his translator managed 2 words. Nexus Keeper. She touched her own forearm where his mark glowed. Her fingers traced the air above his skin without making contact, as if afraid to touch something sacred. This symbol wasn't meant for humans, she explained through the struggling translator. Her people had stories about it, legends passed down through generations. They called it the Stellar Covenant, a binding force that connected living patterns across reality itself. The mark wasn't just on his skin. It was in his blood, his cells, the very structure of his DNA. It functioned like a key crafted to fit locks scattered across dimensions. His entire genetic code had been reshaped to carry this signature. The translation came through broken but clear. His body had been prepared, though he never knew it. The Sentinels weren't just guards for this sector. They were keepers of the Covenant, sworn to protect the network these marks represented. They had watched for generations, maintaining the old ways while their people forgot the reasons behind them. Many thought the stories were myths, tales to frighten children or inspire recruits. But they kept watching, waiting. His arrival wasn't random chance. The pull he felt, the intuition that overrode all training and caution, that had been guidance. The mark knew where it needed to be. It had drawn him through unsafe space, past warnings and defenses, to this specific circle of stone under alien suns. Every choice that seemed like recklessness had been necessity. The engineer from Mars was gone. In his place stood someone bound to a pattern older than human civilization. His survey missions, his technical skills, his entire life up to this point, all of it felt like preparation for something he never knew was coming. The translation struggled with the next concept. Destiny wasn't quite right. It was more like completing a circuit that had been left open for centuries. Leora's eyes held a new respect, but also concern. The Covenant came with responsibilities, dangers. The mark made him a target as much as a symbol. She gestured to the other Sentinels who had formed a loose circle around them. Their weapons remained stored, but their attention was absolute. They were seeing a living legend where moments before they'd seen a trespasser. The emerald glow from his arm pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He could feel it resonating with the stone beneath his feet, with the air around them, with something deeper than the physical world. The connection was growing stronger by the second, opening channels in his mind he never knew existed. Memories that weren't his own began to surface, fragments of knowledge, flashes of other places. His simple birthmark had become the focal point of an interstellar prophecy. The weight of it settled on him, not as a burden but as a fact. There was no going back to survey ships and mineral reports. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time since landing, he felt certain he was where he needed to be. The mark had brought him home to a place he'd never been. Thalon approached with the careful steps of someone who carried weight beyond his years. His armor showed subtle wear patterns at the joints, and the sentinel sigil on his chest had faded with time. He moved past Leora without a word, his attention fixed on the glowing mark. The air grew still around them. Even the ever-present hum of the amphitheater seemed to quiet in his presence. He didn't ask permission. His hands, covered in thin gloves that shimmered with embedded circuitry, reached for the engineer's forearm. The touch was light but deliberate. Thalon's fingers traced the air above the spiraling light without making contact, as if reading its energy signature. His eyes, deep-set and shadowed by a prominent brow ridge, reflected the emerald glow. He studied the pattern with an intensity that felt both clinical and reverent. A low sound escaped his lips, something between a sigh and a prayer. The translation implant struggled with the words, rendering them fragmented but clear in meaning. The signature was authentic. Beyond doubt, the quantum resonance pattern matched the ancient records exactly. There was no possibility of forgery or error. The verification protocols left no room for debate. He spoke of the Earth origin human line, his voice carrying the weight of lost history. That bloodline had been considered extinct for cycles beyond counting. The record showed termination, dissolution, the end of a genetic thread. Yet here stood living proof, a human bearing the mark that should have died with his ancestors. The impossibility of it hung in the air between them. Thalon's examination continued, his instruments recording energy readings that defied conventional biology. He explained that the mark wasn't merely carried in the DNA, it was woven through the subject's entire essence. Quantum entanglement at the cellular level. The engineer's very presence resonated with echoes of another being, another time. Fragments of memory and skill that didn't belong to him, yet were undeniably part of him. This was no simple birthmark or genetic anomaly. Thalon called it a quantum imprint, a deliberate encoding of information and identity at the subatomic level. The pattern wasn't on the skin, it was through it, binding matter and energy in a way that shouldn't be possible. The light wasn't emission, it was manifestation. a visible sign of an invisible architecture. The engineer felt the ground shift beneath him more profoundly than when the stone had moved earlier. His understanding of himself fractured. The man who had left Mars, who had studied engineering and signed on with the Survey Corps, who had worried about promotion and pay grades, that person felt like a character in someone else's story. The foundations of his identity crumbled, leaving only the certainty of the mark on his arm and the truth in Thalen's words. He was not who he thought he was. The life he remembered, the experiences he cherished, the future he had planned, all of it rested on a false premise. He had been living as a passenger in his own body, following a script written by circumstances he never understood. The realization didn't bring panic, but rather a strange clarity, like waking from a dream to find the real world both terrifying and familiar. The past lived in his blood, not as memory or story, but as active, functioning reality. The skills that had surfaced during the duel, the intuition that had guided him through forbidden space, the sense of recognition he felt in this place, all of it came from somewhere else. Someone else. He carried a legacy in his cells, and that legacy had just claimed him as its own. Thalon stepped back, his assessment complete. His expression held no triumph, only solemn acceptance. The verification was finished. The implications were just beginning. The Elder Sentinel's eyes held centuries of waiting, and now that the wait was over, the weight of responsibility settled on them all. The engineer stood at the center of the circle, his glowing arm the only point of light in the gathering twilight, a living connection to something ancient that refused to stay dead. Thalon's voice was low, the sound of it carrying the weight of forgotten history. He told of the rift collapse, an event that shattered more than space. The Nexus Keeper hadn't died in that cataclysm. Its consciousness fragmented, breaking into countless pieces that scattered across realities and timelines. Like shards of a broken mirror, each fragment held a reflection of the whole, but none could function alone. These fragments traveled, seeking vessels that could hold them. They needed compatibility, a specific resonance in the host's biology and consciousness. Most found nothing, fading into the void between worlds. Some found temporary anchors that couldn't sustain them. The search continued across centuries, across dimensions, a desperate scattering of something that refused to die. The engineer was that anchor, chosen by some mechanism beyond understanding. His genetic structure matched the requirements perfectly. The convergence wasn't random chance. His entire life had been preparation for this merger, though he never knew it. The mark on his arm was just the visible sign of a much deeper connection. He wasn't possessing someone else's memories. The memories were his, layered beneath the surface of his conscious mind. The skills that surfaced during the duel, the intuition that guided him here, the sense of recognition, all of it came from within. He wasn't borrowing another's life. He was discovering parts of his own that had been hidden. His dreams of strange landscapes, his curiosity about forgotten places, his drive to explore beyond sanctioned routes. These weren't random traits. They were echoes, impulses left by the fragmented consciousness as it waited to awaken. The pieces had been guiding him toward this moment since before he was born, shaping his choices without his knowledge. The convergence was approaching, a realignment of realities that happened on a cycle spanning millennia. This event required the Nexus Keeper's consciousness to be whole again, to stabilize the shifting boundaries between dimensions. Without this reunification, the fabric of existence would continue to weaken. The cracks would widen, and what lay beyond would come through. Reality itself depended on this awakening. The stability of countless worlds, the integrity of space-time, the very laws of physics, all were tied to the Nexus Keeper's function. The engineer felt the weight of this knowledge settle on him, a responsibility he hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse. The stakes were beyond comprehension, larger than any mission he'd ever undertaken. The man who had boarded the survey ship was gone. That identity felt like a shell, a temporary construct that had served its purpose. The Nexus Keeper was rising within him, not as an invasion but as an integration. The pieces were fitting together, creating something new from the fusion of two existences. The process brought no pain, only a growing sense of completeness. He stood straighter, his posture changing without conscious thought. The way he held his hands, the set of his shoulders, the focus in his eyes, all shifted subtly. The engineer's habits and mannerisms remained, but they were now layered with something ancient and certain. The transformation wasn't about loss, but about becoming what he was always meant to be. The emerald glow from his arm pulsed stronger, its light spreading to envelop his entire form. The sentinels watched in silence, their weapons now completely lowered. They recognized what was happening, understood the significance of this moment. Their vigil was ending, their purpose shifting from waiting to serving. The Nexus Keeper had returned, and with that return came new duties, new dangers, and a chance to repair what had been broken so long ago. A small hand parted the line of sentinels. A child stepped through. Her skin the color of twilight sky brushed with human tones. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone who knew she belonged exactly where she was standing, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the glowing mark. The crowd murmured, some reaching to pull her back, but she ignored them. She spoke without introduction, her voice clear and steady. She talked of dreams that had haunted her sleep for seasons. Visions of a stranger arriving under twin suns, his arm burning with green fire. She described the amphitheater down to the cracks in the stone, the pattern of the energy channels in the floor, the way the light would catch the sentinel armor. Details she couldn't have known, couldn't have imagined. Her mother had called them night terrors. The other children said she had too much imagination. She learned to keep the dreams to herself, to whisper them only to the walls of her room. But they never faded, never changed. The same vision, night after night, growing clearer as time passed. She knew he was coming long before the ship entered their atmosphere. Her innocence gave the words weight that Thalen's authority couldn't match. She had no agenda, no political motive, no reason to deceive. She simply reported what she saw behind her closed eyes. The clarity of her description left no room for doubt. She wasn't interpreting legends or reading ancient texts. She was witnessing events as they happened in some other layer of reality. She was the first in generations to truly see the Nexus, not as a concept or historical footnote, but as a living, functioning thing. Her sight cut through time, showing her moments that hadn't happened yet and echoes of things long past. She stood with one foot in the present, one in the future, seeing the connections others could only theorize about. Vexar stepped forward, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip. His armor showed different markings than the others, darker and less ornate. The sigil on his shoulder depicted a closed fist, the symbol of the isolationist faction. His movement was deliberate, calculated to draw attention without appearing aggressive. Yet, he spoke without looking at Thalon or Leora. His words were for the crowd, for the uncertain faces watching. He called the engineer a saboteur, a plant from the mining corporations that had exploited their system generations ago. He reminded them of the Cetrian Assembly's decree. No outsiders, no exceptions. The ban had been their protection after the resource wars nearly destroyed their homeworld. Trust had become their most valuable commodity. They hoarded it, spent it carefully, rarely risked it on strangers. Vexar's voice carried the weight of historical betrayal. He spoke of depleted minds, poisoned atmospheres, promises broken by smiling diplomats. The scars ran deep in their collective memory. His faction believed security came from sealed borders and suspicion. Leora countered quickly. Her voice held less certainty than before. She spoke of the networks, the connections that sustained all systems. She argued that isolation meant slow death. The void didn't care about political boundaries or old grievances. It would consume them all if the Nexus failed. Her words were logical, practical, but they lacked the emotional pull of Vexar's warnings. The crowd divided along invisible lines. Some shifted toward Vexar, their hands moving toward their own weapons. Others stood with Leora, their postures more open but no less tense. A third group held back, uncertain, watching both sides with worried eyes. The unity of moments before shattered into factions and fear. The engineer's fate hung in the balance. Prophecy and glowing marks meant nothing against generations of distrust. His survival depended on political will now, on whether fear or hope would win this internal struggle. He saw the danger clearly for the first time. The void entities were a distant threat. The division before him was immediate and potentially lethal. Vexar's accusations grew more specific. He pointed to the engineer's ship, its design unlike their own vessels. He mentioned the Survey Corporation logo still visible on his suit. Every difference became evidence of deception. The mark on his arm could be advanced technology, not some ancient sign. They had all seen corporate tricks before. Leora tried to reason with him. She spoke of the energy readings, the way the arena responded to the engineer's presence. She reminded them of Kira's visions, the child's unquestionable sincerity. But Vexar dismissed the evidence. Visions could be manipulated. Technology could be faked. Their only safety lay in following established protocol. The engineer watched the exchange, understanding little of the specific history, but recognizing the pattern. Fear against hope, tradition against necessity. He'd seen similar conflicts on a dozen worlds, though never with stakes this high. The greatest threat to their survival wasn't the void. It was their inability to trust. Vexar's followers moved to form a loose circle around their leader. Their weapons remained holstered, but their hands stayed close. Leora's supporters mirrored the movement, creating a tense space between the two groups. The arena, which had felt like a place of revelation moments before, now felt like a council chamber. Moments from violence. Thalon remained silent, his eyes moving between the factions. His age and status gave him authority, but even he seemed hesitant to intervene. This was a conflict that went deeper than rank or tradition. It touched the core of their identity as a people. Their survival instinct warred with their duty to something larger. The engineer understood then that his mission would require more than navigating strange realms and fighting void entities. He would have to navigate these internal divisions, these ancient rivalries that threatened to undermine everything before it began. The proof of who he was wouldn't come from glowing marks or elder confirmations. It would come from actions, from choices made under pressure. The political friction became another layer of the challenge, another variable in an already impossible equation. He stood at the center of the divide, his glowing arm the focal point for both hope and fear. The outcome depended on which force proved stronger. Thalon touched the stone floor with his bare palm. The obsidian surface shimmered where his fingers made contact, patterns of light spreading like ripples in water. He spoke of a sanctuary beneath their feet, hidden not by rock or steel but by dimensional folding. The Nexus chamber existed in a pocket reality, accessible only through specific gateways. One of those gateways was here, under the arena they stood upon. The chamber was anchored across all 13 systems simultaneously. Its existence was spread through the network, present everywhere and nowhere at once. The anchor points provided stability, tying the pocket dimension to physical locations across the galaxies. This site held one such anchor, buried deep below the ceremonial grounds. The Sentinels had guarded it for generations without fully understanding what they protected. This was no ceremonial site. The arena's true purpose was concealment. Beneath the ritual combat grounds lay a laboratory for reality itself. The chamber contained technology that could manipulate the fundamental forces of existence, tools for repairing dimensional tiers, reinforcing natural laws and countering void incursions. It was a workshop built by beings who understood the architecture of creation. The engineer's arrival had triggered the ancient systems. His unique energy signature, the mark on his arm, had activated protocols dormant for millennia. Primordial infrastructure began waking up, systems that predated all known civilizations. The chamber recognized its keeper, even if the keeper didn't yet recognize himself. The door had been locked until now. The chamber held answers, records of the original covenant, data on the network's construction, knowledge that could save the failing systems. It also contained tools designed for the Nexus Keeper's use, devices that could stabilize reality, weapons that could fight the void, transportation that could cross the network instantly, all waiting for the right hands to wield them. It was designed as an emergency intervention system, a last resort for when reality itself faced collapse. The chamber could reinforce dimensional boundaries, repair damaged connections, and even reverse local unraveling. But it required a catalyst to function, a specific consciousness with the right resonance to activate its systems. Without that spark, it remained dormant, useless. His awakening might provide that spark. The integration of Nexus Keeper and Human Engineer created something new, something that could interface with the ancient technology. The chamber needed both the ancient knowledge and the fresh perspective. The stability of the past combined with the adaptability of the present. Together they might accomplish what neither could alone. The arena was a door. The patterns carved into the stone floor weren't decorative. They were activation sequences, controls for accessing the chamber below. The engineer's mark was the key that could turn those controls. His energy signature would unlock the passage, opening the way to the pocket dimension. The political divisions, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it faded before this simple truth. They needed to go down. The answers weren't in debates or prophecies. They were beneath their feet, waiting in the dark. The chamber offered their best chance at understanding the threat and fighting it. But accessing it required the engineer to complete his transformation. He had to accept that he was both man and myth, both engineer and keeper. The ground vibrated with suppressed energy. The emerald light from his arm reflected in the obsidian floor, creating complex patterns that shifted and changed. The door was ready. The key was present. All that remained was the turning. The choice to step into a reality beyond anything he'd known. To embrace a destiny he never asked for but couldn't refuse. The political factions watched in silence. Even Vexar held his objections. The evidence was too compelling, the need too urgent. The chamber represented their best hope, perhaps their only hope. All arguments ceased before the simple reality of what lay beneath them and what would be required to reach it. She raised her energy-bound blade, ready to strike me down for trespassing, but when her eyes locked onto the spiral pattern on my forearm, her entire body froze mid-motion. That's when I realized this wasn't just a birthmark. It was something far more ancient, something that connected me to a past I never knew existed. The warning signals flashed across his console, each alert more urgent than the last. He silenced them one by one, his focus fixed on the terrain below. The Helios Consortium maps showed safe passage along the western ridges, but he'd charted his own course days ago, straight into the zones marked with high-risk sigils. 3 research teams had taken that same vector before him. None ever logged a return signal. A low hum vibrated through the ship's hull as he descended. The landscape felt familiar, though he'd never set sensors on this world before. Rolling plains of violet grass gave way to jagged obsidian formations that rose like broken teeth. He knew this place, not from maps or reports, but deeper than that. A pull, like gravity from somewhere other than the planet's core, guided his hand on the controls. His forearm began to itch beneath his sleeve. A persistent, crawling sensation centered on the spiral mark he'd carried since birth. He'd always dismissed it as a flaw in his skin, a random pattern with no meaning. Now it felt like a compass needle swinging toward true north. Ahead, a vast circular structure rose from the plain. It wasn't built. It was grown or carved, or perhaps both, a wide amphitheater of seamless dark stone that seemed to drink the light. His instincts said turn back. His training said observe from a distance, but something in his blood said go closer. He set the ship down just outside the ring. The itch became a burn. Protocol demanded he run a full security sweep before exit. He powered down the scanners and stepped out into air that tasted of metal and ozone. Sentinels detected him within seconds. Their approach was silent. No engines, no footfalls, just a sudden presence at the edge of his vision. 3 figures in silver-gray armor, faces obscured by reflective visors. Their weapons weren't drawn, but their posture made clearance unnecessary. This wasn't an inspection. It was a perimeter enforcement. A voice echoed inside his helmet, bypassing comm protocols. The translation software glitched, rendering the words broken but clear in intent. Leave. Now. He took another step forward instead. The itch on his arm flared into a sharp, localized heat. One sentinel moved to block his path. The others fanned out. No more warnings. The lead guard drew a blade that wasn't metal, a shaft of coherent light that hummed like a live wire. The circle of the amphitheater seemed to tighten around them. Ground that looked solid shifted under his boots, aligning him toward the center. He knew then it wasn't about trespassing. It was about testing. His mark pulsed in rhythm with the low thrum coming from the stone beneath him. The sentinel raised her blade. The duel began. She moved faster than his eyes could track. One moment she stood 10 paces away, the next her blade hummed inches from his throat. Her armor shone under the twin suns, pearlescent plates shifting from silver to deep blue as she adjusted her stance. The weapon in her hand wasn't metal. It sang with contained energy, a sharp note that vibrated in his teeth. He raised his empty hands, tried to form words. The translation implant in his jaw scrambled the syntax. What came out sounded like garbled static, meaningless noise. She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on his through the visor, cold and assessing. This wasn't an arrest. She spoke again, clear even through the distortion. The words meant challenge, trial by combat, honor owed. Her footing was perfect, weight balanced between both feet, blade held at ready position. She watched his breathing, his slight shifts in posture. He was a survey tech from Mars, not a fighter. His training covered first aid and mineral scans, not hand-to-hand combat against warriors with energy weapons. He tried again to explain. Wrong place, wrong time, just turned the wrong corner in the sky. The implant failed to convey the nuance. It spit out fractured phrases that sounded like insults. Her response was a single shake of her head. No quarter given. This wasn't about laws being broken. It was about something deeper, something coded in ritual. Her first strike came without warning. A blur of motion and light that should have ended him. He threw himself sideways, feeling the heat of the blade pass through the air where his neck had been. The ground met his shoulder hard. He rolled, came up scrambling. She was already repositioning, flowing into another attack sequence. He had no defense against this. No training, no weapon, no armor. Just a ship suit and a fading hope that someone might notice he was missing. Her second attack came low, aiming for his legs. He jumped back, but not fast enough. The tip of her blade grazed his calf. The pain was instant and electric, like touching a live wire. His body moved before his mind caught up. As she advanced for the finishing strike, his left arm came up in a blocking motion while his right foot swept toward her leading leg. It was instinct, pure reaction, muscle memory from drills he'd never done. His forearm met her wrist, deflecting the blade sideways. His foot connected with her ankle, breaking her balance. She recovered instantly, eyes widening behind the visor. Surprise, then reassessment. She hadn't expected resistance. Hadn't expected skill. He stood panting, his own shock mirroring hers. That movement hadn't been his. The block, the counter, they came from somewhere else, someone else. His arm tingled where he'd parried the blow. She came at him again, faster this time. Testing. Her strikes were precise, controlled. Probing his defenses. He responded without thinking, movements flowing like water. A block here, a dodge there. His body knew this dance, even if his mind didn't. Each motion felt familiar, practiced 1,000 times in some other life. The duel became conversation without words. Attack and response. Probe and counter. She pressed harder, increasing the speed and complexity of her attacks. He met each one, his movements growing smoother with each exchange. The fear began to fade, replaced by a strange certainty. This wasn't luck. This was memory. His arms moved without his command. They came up into a defensive posture, elbows tight, forearms crossing to form a shield. Her energy blade came down in a clean arc meant to cleave him shoulder to hip. His arms intercepted the strike. The impact shuddered through his bones, but he held. The blade sparked against some invisible barrier just above his skin. He hadn't raised any shield generator. Hadn't even thought to try. He pivoted on his back foot, letting her momentum carry her forward. His left hand shot out, grabbed her weapon arm just above the wrist. His thumb found a pressure point he didn't know existed. Her grip faltered. The blade flickered. He twisted, using her own weight against her, and sent her stumbling past him. She caught her balance instantly, spinning to face him again. Her eyes were wide behind the visor. Confusion. Reassessment. This wasn't luck. It wasn't adrenaline. The movements were too precise, too economical. Every block was perfectly timed. Every counter was placed exactly where it would disrupt her balance without wasting energy. He felt like a passenger in his own body, watching someone else pilot his limbs. The knowledge was there in his muscles and his reflexes. Drills he'd never run. Stances he'd never practiced. She came at him again, faster this time. Testing. Her attacks were more complex now, feints followed by sudden strikes to vulnerable points. He responded without hesitation. A low sweep aimed at his knees was met with a leap and twist that put him behind her. A thrust toward his throat was deflected with a forearm block that left her arm numb. He moved with a grace he'd never possessed, his body flowing from one position to the next like water. The fear was gone now. In its place was a cold clarity. His mind raced, trying to understand what was happening, but his body already knew. It remembered combat in a way his conscious mind did not. The surge of energy through his system felt familiar, like putting on an old coat. The confusion remained, a constant undercurrent beneath the certainty of his movements. She pressed harder, her attacks coming faster. The energy blade hummed through the air, leaving faint trails of light in its wake. He countered each move, his defenses flawless. There was no effort in it, no strain. His breathing remained even, his heart rate steady. This was as natural to him now as walking, more natural. Her eyes watched him through the visor, the anger replaced by something else. Curiosity, wonder. The duel had changed. It was no longer about punishment. It was about discovery. Each attack was a question. Each defense was an answer. She was probing his skills, testing the limits of this sudden ability he displayed. Thalon's voice carried the weight of stars as he spoke. He wasn't describing a mission anymore. He was defining existence. 13 systems hung in the balance, each one connected by threads of energy older than species, then planets, then light itself. The network wasn't built. It was grown, a living architecture that sustained the fabric of reality across incomprehensible distances. The void incursions were more than attacks. They were unravelings, tears in the weave of things that allowed nothingness to bleed through. Each breach weakened the connections, threatening to sever the systems from each other forever. Isolation meant dissolution. A system cut off from the network would cease to be, not destroyed, unmade. The nexus was the heart, the central point where all threads met, where energy flowed and balanced. It had been failing for generations, its rhythm growing erratic. The Sentinels had maintained the outer structures, but the core required a specific resonance, a signature that had been lost. Until now, each system held a key, not a physical object to be carried, but an anchor point of solidified energy, a focus for the network's stability. These anchors were fragments of the original technology that birthed the Nexus. They were tuned to specific frequencies, each one critical to the whole. Without all 13, the structure would fail. The keys weren't artifacts to be collected. They were points of convergence that needed activation. Each one required the Nexus Keeper's presence, his specific energy signature, to function at full capacity. They were like forgotten engines waiting for the right pilot to restart them. Reality itself depended on these anchors. The unraveling had already begun at the edges of the network. Systems were experiencing strange decays in physical laws. Time flowed unevenly. Matter lost cohesion. The damage was spreading inward, following the weakening connections. Without intervention, everything would come apart. The engineer's awakening was the first step. His emergence as the Nexus Keeper provided the missing resonance. The spark needed to reignite the system, but awakening wasn't enough. He had to travel to each anchor point, to stand at each key location and restore the connection personally. There were no shortcuts, no remote solutions. The crowd's murmur grew into a chant. Nexus Keeper. The words weren't celebration. They were acknowledgement. Demand. The weight of 13 systems settled on his shoulders. The personal revelation became something larger. His identity crisis meant nothing against the collapse of reality. The scale of it defied understanding. This wasn't about saving a planet or a people. It was about preserving the structure of existence across light years of space. The mission parameters rewritten themselves in his mind. No more survey objectives or scientific curiosity. This was maintenance on a cosmic scale. He looked at the faces around him. The Sentinels who had been ready to kill him now looked to him for salvation. The child who saw the future waited for him to make it happen. The elder who carried centuries of knowledge deferred to his unproven power. The shift was absolute. The emerald glow from his arm seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, but also with something deeper, a rhythm that came from the stones beneath his feet, from the air around them, from the distant stars watching through the atmosphere. The network was recognizing its keeper. The connection went both ways. He felt the strain of the failing systems like a tension in his own body. A dull ache that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The void incursions registered as sharp pains along his nerves. The experience was no longer theoretical. It was physical, personal. The mission was clear. 13 systems, 13 keys, a journey across space that would test more than his skills. It would test his very nature. The integration of Nexus Keeper and Engineer was just beginning. Both would have to function as one to complete what lay ahead. The crowd's chant faded, replaced by a watchful silence. They understood the stakes now. The political divisions, the fear of outsiders, the doubts about prophecy, all of it shrank before the reality of what they faced. Either the Nexus Keeper succeeded or everything ended. There were no other options, no fallback positions. The universe had placed its bet on a man who until recently worried about fuel efficiency and sensor calibration. The absurdity of it would have been funny if the consequences weren't so absolute. Kira pointed to the sky, her voice barely a whisper. The holes were getting bigger, she said. Her small finger traced a widening circle in the air, her eyes fixed on a point beyond the atmosphere. The others followed her gaze but saw only clear blue. She saw what was coming. Thalan's shoulders slumped slightly. He confirmed what the child sensed. The void entities were never destroyed. The ancient containment held them at the edges of reality, but the barriers were failing. Each breach gave them access to more energy, more space to feed. They consumed fractured dimensions, growing stronger with every system that weakened. They weren't creatures in any biological sense. They were absences, patterns of non-existence that fed on the fraying edges of what was real. Where they passed, matter unraveled. Laws of physics twisted, then broke. They didn't attack. They simply consumed, leaving nothing behind. The boundaries between dimensions had worn thin over centuries. The natural barriers that separated realities had degraded without the Nexus Keeper's influence. The void entities sensed this weakness pressing against the thinning walls. Each push created another crack. Each crack spread further. The emerald glow from the engineer's arm brightened as Thalan spoke. The light wasn't just a marker. It was a counterforce, a stabilizer. The energy signature opposed the void influence, strengthening reality where it touched. The mark pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, but also with something deeper, the fundamental frequency of existence itself. The arena's stone markers began to pulse in response to his presence. Faint lines of emerald light traced between the obsidian blocks, forming patterns that matched the spiral on his arm. The entire structure was awakening, recognizing its keeper. The ground vibrated with low energy, a hum that resonated in bone rather than air. This wasn't a war between nations or species. It was a conflict of existence against unmaking. There would be no negotiations, no treaties, no surrendered territories. The void entities didn't want conquest. They wanted cessation, the complete unraveling of all that was. The engineer felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. This was beyond any mission parameter he'd ever encountered. No training prepared you for fighting nothingness. No weapons were designed to combat absence. The scale of it defied comprehension. He was a mechanic suddenly handed the blueprint for reality itself. The void was coming, not as an invasion fleet or army, but as a wave of dissolution. It would start at the edges of the network, in the most distant systems where the connections were weakest. It would follow the energy pathways inward, consuming each anchor point until nothing remained. He was the first line of defense, not because of any skill or strategy, but because of what he was. His very presence strengthened the fabric of reality. Where he stood, the void's influence weakened. The emerald light from his mark pushed back against the encroaching nothingness, creating pockets of stability. But he couldn't be everywhere. The 13 systems spanned distances that defied travel. The network connected them, but the connections were failing. He had to reach each anchor point, activate each key before the void entities consumed them. The race wasn't against time, but against entropy itself. Kira's small hand found his. Her touch was cool, steady. She didn't look afraid. She looked resigned, as if she'd seen this moment many times in her dreams and knew how it must play out. Her quiet certainty anchored him better than any weapon or plan could have. The sentinels formed a tighter circle around them. Their weapons were active now, but not aimed at him. They faced outward, toward the perimeter, toward the sky. Their posture had changed from ceremonial guards to combat readiness. They understood what was coming, what they had to defend against. The air took on a strange quality, like the moment before a storm breaks. The light from the twin suns seemed thinner, less substantial. Shadows stretched in ways that defied geometry. The void was closer than anyone had realized. Its influence was already touching the edges of this system, testing the defenses. The engineer felt it as a pressure against his senses. A wrongness in the air that made his skin crawl. The emerald glow from his arm brightened in response, pushing back against the encroaching emptiness. The dance had begun. The void would push. He would resist. And somewhere in that struggle, reality would either hold or break. The engineer felt energy flow through him. It came in waves, starting at the mark on his arm and spreading through his body. The sensation was like stepping into a strong current, power rushing through veins that had never carried such force before. His skin tingled, his muscles tightened, his vision sharpened. The change was both exhilarating and terrifying. His mark glowed brighter with each step down the ancient passage. The emerald light pulsed in time with his heartbeat, but also with something deeper, the rhythm of the chamber below. The stone walls responded, faint patterns appearing where the light touched them. The entire passageway seemed to be waking up, recognizing the return of its keeper after long silence. He accessed memories not his own. Images flashed through his mind, a star chart of unfamiliar constellations, the schematic of a device he'd never seen, the proper stance for deflecting an energy blade. The knowledge was there, complete and ready, but it felt like reading someone else's notes. His hands knew movements his brain had never learned. He could feel the void entities pushing against the boundaries. The pressure was a constant ache at the edges of his awareness, like a headache forming behind the eyes. He sensed their hunger, their mindless need to consume. They tested the weakened points in reality, probing for weaknesses. Each push sent a shiver through his nervous system. His very presence strengthened the anchors. Where he walked, the dimensional boundaries grew more stable. The emerald light from his mark reinforced reality, pushing back against the void's influence. The effect was local, limited to his immediate area, but undeniable. He was becoming a walking stabilization field, though he didn't yet understand how to control it. But this power came with a cost. Strain built in his muscles, a deep fatigue that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Disorientation struck without warning, sudden vertigo that made him reach for the wall. His thoughts fragmented, pieces of his own memory mixing with the alien knowledge surfacing from somewhere deeper. The integration was painful, messy, incomplete. He had to learn control and quickly. The power threatened to overwhelm him, to burn out circuits not designed for such energy. He focused on his breathing, on placing one foot carefully before the other. Each movement required concentration now, to avoid triggering responses he wasn't ready to handle. The knowledge was there, but the wisdom to use it properly was not. Leora watched him, both wary and amazed. Her combat training had taught her to read body language, and his was changing by the minute. The awkward engineer was disappearing, replaced by someone with the bearing of a veteran warrior. But the transformation was uneven, moments of grace followed by stumbling uncertainty. She kept her energy blade ready, unsure whether to defend him from threats or from himself. Kira held his hand, her touch steadying him. Her small fingers wrapped around his, cool and certain. Where Leora watched with a soldier's caution, the child offered simple trust. Her presence acted as an anchor, pulling him back when the foreign memories threatened to sweep him away. She didn't seem surprised by his struggle, as if her dreams had shown her this would happen. The Nexus Keeper was awakening, but the man was still learning. Two consciousnesses shared one body, neither fully in control. Instinct fought training, memory fought experience, power fought limitations. The engineer focused on the immediate, the feel of stone under his boots, the sound of their breathing, the weight of Kira's hand in his. The grand mission of saving reality would have to wait. First, he had to learn how to walk without stumbling, how to think without his mind splintering, how to be both what he was and what he was becoming. The passage sloped downward, the air growing colder. His mark cast shifting patterns on the walls, revealing ancient inscriptions that matched the spiral on his skin. Each symbol he recognized brought another flash of memory, another piece of knowledge slotting into place. The process was becoming slightly easier, the disorientation less severe. He was adapting, learning to ride the current rather than fight it. Leora's watchfulness eased slightly as she saw his steps grow more sure. Her grip on the energy blade relaxed from combat, ready to alert. Kira's hand remained in his, a constant connection that grounded him in the present. The three of them moved deeper into the mountain, each playing their part in a dance they were only beginning to understand. The power continued to flow through him, but now it felt less like a flood and more like a river finding its course. The true scope settled over him, heavier than any atmosphere. This wasn't about mapping mineral deposits or charting safe jump routes. His task was to mend time itself, to weave together strands of reality that had frayed across centuries. The convergence wasn't a single event, but a process, a delicate recalibration of existence that required his specific energy signature as catalyst. He glimpsed flickers of the past, sworn alliances between species now forgotten, a solemn vow made at the edge of a dying star to preserve the integrity of all things. These weren't memories he owned, but echoes he channeled, moments surfacing from the fragmented consciousness now awakening within him. The weight of that ancient promise settled in his bones, a debt come due across generations, his personal identity shattered completely. The engineer who'd worried about fuel mixtures and sensor arrays was gone, his concerns rendered microscopic against the cosmic scale of what faced him now. He was no longer an individual but a function, a necessary component in machinery that sustained reality itself. The mark on his arm wasn't just a symbol, it was his new definition. He understood his position in the Covenant, not as a leader or hero but as a linchpin, the critical connection point holding together a structure spanning star systems and centuries. Remove him, and the entire network would collapse. The responsibility was absolute, leaving no room for error or hesitation. Every action now carried consequences beyond any scale he'd previously known. Failure meant more than his death. It meant the complete unraveling of physical laws, the dissolution of matter, the end of conscious existence across multiple dimensions. The void wouldn't conquer. It would simply consume, leaving absolute nothingness where worlds had spun and lives had been lived. The stakes were absolute and the margin for error was zero. He accepted the duty without celebration. There was no pride in this burden, only grim acknowledgement of necessity. His recklessness in ignoring the warnings, his stubborn curiosity that breached restricted sectors. These weren't mistakes, but prerequisites. They had been the first unconscious steps toward fulfilling a purpose written into his very DNA long before his birth. The convergence required an energy exchange at levels that defied measurement. He would serve as both conduit and catalyst, channeling forces that could unmake stars while using them to reinforce the fabric of reality. The process would test his physical form beyond any known limit, straining the integration of human and Nexus Keeper to its breaking point. He saw the path ahead clearly now. 13 anchor points across crumbling systems, each one requiring his presence to stabilize. The journey would take him through regions where reality had already begun to fail, where void entities pressed against thinning dimensional walls. There would be no backup, no rescue, no second chances. Either he succeeded or everything ended. His earlier life felt like a preparation he never understood. The technical skills, the problem-solving mindset, the tolerance for long solitude, all had been shaping him for this moment. The engineer hadn't been replaced but weaponized, his human perspective providing the adaptability the ancient consciousness lacked. He adjusted his grip on the present moment, focusing on the cold stone beneath his hands and the steady breathing of his companions. The cosmic mission began here in this darkness with these allies. The weight was immense but strangely familiar, as if he'd been training for this his whole life without knowing it. The emerald glow from his arm pulsed in rhythm with some deeper frequency, a beat that seemed to come from the universe itself. He felt the connection stretching away from him, thin threads of energy linking to distant stars and unknown worlds. They were his to maintain, his to protect, his to save. The recklessness that brought him here had become his only purpose. Leora touched the pendant on her chest. The metal was cool under her fingers, a simple disc of aged silver that had been in her family for generations. She'd always worn it, never knowing its true purpose. Now it warmed at her touch, responding to the emerald glow from the engineer's arm. The disc began to pulse with a soft blue light that mirrored the rhythm of his mark. This was no simple ornament. She called it the Shard of Eternity, a fragment of the original technology that had sealed the rift centuries ago. It was one of the keys, a node in the cosmic architecture that maintained reality across the 13 systems. Her family had guarded it without understanding what they protected, passing it down as an heirloom while its true purpose slept. The pendant's blue light intensified as the engineer approached. The two energies, emerald from his arm, azure from the pendant, began to resonate. The air between them hummed with power, creating visible ripples in the atmosphere. The connection was immediate and absolute. The key recognized its keeper even after all this time. The keys were not objects to be collected. They were focal points, anchors in the network that bound the systems together. Each one was tuned to a specific frequency, a unique signature that maintained part of the whole. Without all 13 functioning, the network would fail. Reality would unravel from the edges inward, consumed by the void. This was the first step, here now in this arena under alien suns. The journey would take them across light years of space, through systems that had grown strange and dangerous during the long silence. They would face void entities, political resistance, and the constant strain of maintaining the network against the pressure of nothingness. The path ahead was long. Each key presented its own challenges, its own guardians and obstacles. Some would be protected by societies that had forgotten their purpose. Others would be in regions where reality had already begun to fray. The travel alone would test their resources and their resolve. Danger waited at every turn. The void entities would sense their progress, would try to stop them from reinforcing the network. Political factions would see them as threats or opportunities. The very act of activating the keys might draw attention they couldn't afford. There would be no safe harbors, no easy solutions. Without the keys, all was lost. The unraveling had already begun. Systems at the edge of the network were experiencing strange decays in physical laws. Time flowed unevenly. Matter lost coherence, light bent in impossible ways. The damage was spreading, following the weakening connections between anchors. Soon it would reach the core systems. The engineer felt the weight of each key already, not as physical burden but as responsibility. He could sense them out there, scattered across the galaxies, waiting. Their silent call added to the pressure building in his mind. Each one represented another step, another challenge, another chance to fail. The resonance between his mark and Leora's pendant grew stronger. The blue and green lights merged, creating a complex pattern that hung in the air between them. The energy felt ancient, powerful, but also familiar. It was the same force that flowed through the network, that sustained existence itself. He understood now that the keys were not separate from him. They were extensions of the same system that had created his mark. Activating them would be like awakening parts of himself that had been sleeping. Each key would strengthen the network, but it would also strengthen his connection to it. The transformation would continue with each success. The first key was here, with Leora. The others waited across impossible distances. The journey would change them all, but it had to be made. There were no alternatives, no other options. The universe had given them this chance, and they had to take it. The weight was immense, but so was the need. Leora removed the pendant from her neck. The chain slipped free without resistance. She held it out to him, her hand steady. The blue light pulsed in rhythm with his breathing now, as if already part of him. The transfer felt inevitable, necessary. The first key had found its keeper, and the long work could begin. The engineer looked at Leora, then at Kira. 3 beings from different worlds, bound by a purpose none of them had chosen, but all must serve. The shared need outweighed their differences. They stood together silently, the weight of what came next settling over them. The political divisions, the doubts, the fears, all were left behind on the surface. Below waited answers and danger, and the first steps of a journey that would decide everything. This was not a one-person mission. The scale demanded combined strengths. Leora brought combat skills honed through years of sentinel training. Her knowledge of weapons, tactics, and survival in hostile environments would be their shield. Kira offered something rarer, a child's vision that cut through time and deception. Her dreams had shown her paths others couldn't see, dangers others wouldn't anticipate. The engineer provided the key. His awakening power, the mark on his arm, would open doors that had been sealed for centuries. They would descend together into the ancient passage. The way down was not marked on any map, known only to the sentinels who had guarded it. Thalan gave a slight nod, his approval silent but clear. The political factions watched, their disagreements momentarily set aside. Even Vexar held his tongue, though his eyes remained doubtful. The need was too great for further debate. Leora took the lead, her energy blade glowing softly in the dim light. Her movements were economical, her eyes scanning for threats. She knew this passage from training exercises, though she had never gone beyond the first security barrier. Her role was protection, and she accepted it without question. Kira followed close behind, her small hand brushing the wall as if reading its history through her fingertips. She whispered warnings about pressure points and hidden triggers only she could sense. The engineer came last, his mark casting an emerald pool of light around them. The glow intensified as they moved deeper, reacting to the ancient stone. His body remembered this place in ways his mind did not. Each step felt familiar, like retracing a path walked many times before. The integration of Nexus Keeper and human continued. memories surfacing that guided his movements without conscious thought. The arena sealed behind them with a low rumble. The sound was final, the stone sliding into place with ancient precision. There would be no turning back, no second thoughts. The way forward was the only option now. The surface, with its politics and doubts, was closed to them. Their world had narrowed to this passage, this mission, this fragile alliance. The adventure began not with excitement but with solemn purpose. It was rooted in memory, both known and rediscovered, and in the courage to face what lay ahead. The air grew colder as they descended, the weight of rock above them pressing down. The only light came from Leora's blade and the engineer's mark, creating shifting shadows that danced along the walls. They stepped into the dark, the emerald glow leading the way. The passage was narrow at first, then widened into a carved tunnel that sloped downward. The stonework was precise, seamless, crafted by techniques lost to time. Symbols lined the walls, matching the pattern on the engineer's arm. They pulsed softly in response to his presence, guiding them deeper into the earth. The silence was broken only by their footsteps and the hum of energy weapons. Leora checked each intersection, her training evident in her controlled movements. Kira would occasionally point left or right, her directions given with quiet certainty. The engineer followed, feeling the pull of the chamber below growing stronger with each step. His mark burned with increased intensity, the light piercing the darkness like a beacon. They moved as one unit, each playing their part without need for discussion. Leora's vigilance, Kira's intuition, the engineer's awakening power, all were necessary. Alone, any one of them would fail. Together they had a chance. The passage seemed to acknowledge their unity, the way opening before them without resistance. The ancient systems recognized the combination of forces, the right mix of skills and signatures required to proceed. The darkness ahead was absolute, but the emerald light pushed it back, revealing steps carved into the living rock. The descent continued, each step taking them further from the world they knew and deeper into the heart of the mystery. The air changed, losing the scent of dust and gaining a metallic tang like ozone after a storm. The engineer could feel the chamber waiting below, its presence a constant pressure in his mind. The first key was close now, and with it, the true beginning of their quest. The air turned cold as they moved deeper into the passage. Their breath formed faint clouds in the emerald light coming from the engineer's arm. The stone underfoot was smooth from ages of wear, sloping downward into darkness. The air smelled of wet rock and something else, ozone and ancient dust. Leora took the lead, her energy blade casting a soft blue glow ahead of them. She moved with practiced caution, checking each turn before committing. Her free hand brushed against the wall, feeling for vibrations or temperature changes. Her training was taking over, every sense tuned for danger. Kira stayed close to the engineer, her small fingers wrapped in the fabric of his sleeve. She whispered warnings that only he could hear. Pressure plate 6 steps ahead. False left turn that leads to a drop. Her voice was calm, certain as if reading from a map only she could see. She was their early warning system, her visions cutting through the darkness. The engineer felt the past pressing in on him. Memories surfaced without warning. A flash of this corridor filled with light and people, the echo of footsteps that weren't their own. He knew the correct path without knowing how he knew it. His hand would twitch toward a particular carving on the wall. His feet would avoid certain stones. The knowledge was there, waiting. He recognized this place from somewhere deeper than memory. The curve of the ceiling, the pattern of the carvings, the way sound traveled down the passage, all of it felt familiar. He'd never been here, but part of him had. The integration continued, foreign memories slotting into place like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. The void entities sensed their progress. A sudden chill swept through the passage, colder than the natural air. Shadows deepened in the corners, taking on solid forms that shouldn't exist. The pressure against his mind increased, a constant push of nothingness trying to find purchase. They were resisting the stabilization his presence brought. The walls pulsed with emerald energy in response. The carvings glowed where the light from his arm touched them, patterns awakening after long sleep. The stone itself seemed to fight back against the void's influence. The battle was silent, invisible, but he felt it in his bones, reality reinforcing itself against the encroaching emptiness. Each step forward was a struggle. The void pushed back with increasing force. The air grew thick, resistant like walking through water. Leora's energy blade flickered as she cut through the resistance. Kira's warnings came faster, her voice tight with strain. The engineer focused on maintaining his light, on keeping the connection to the chamber below. They passed traps that had been set generations ago, pressure plates that no longer functioned, energy fields that had faded to nothing, deadfalls sealed by rockfalls. The passage had been designed to stop intruders, but time had worn down its defenses. What remained were echoes of threats, shadows of dangers that had once been real. The descent continued, the slope growing steeper. Steps appeared, carved into the living rock worn smooth by time. Leora tested each one before putting her weight on it. Kira guided them around steps that looked solid but weren't. The engineer followed, his light revealing more of the ancient craftsmanship with each pulse. The air changed again, gaining a metallic taste like copper and electricity. The chamber was close now. He could feel its presence like a weight in his chest, a pull that grew stronger with each step. The void's resistance intensified, the cold becoming painful. His mark burned with corresponding energy, fighting back. They reached a circular door made of the same obsidian as the arena above. It was seamless without handle or visible mechanism. The engineer knew what to do. He placed his palm against the cold stone, the spiral on his forearm aligning with a matching pattern on the door. The emerald light flared and the door began to slide open without sound. Beyond lay darkness that even his light couldn't penetrate. The air that flowed out was ancient, untouched for centuries. It carried the smell of ozone and something else, the scent of waiting machinery, of power held in check. The first key was close now. They could all feel it. The real test was about to begin. The three stood before the first key, its light pulsing in perfect rhythm with the mark on his arm. The chamber hummed with ancient energy, waiting. Leora kept her blade ready, eyes scanning the dark corners. Kira's small hand stayed wrapped in the engineer's sleeve, her visions quiet now. This was only the beginning. 12 more anchors waited across crumbling systems, each one a lifeline for reality itself. The convergence approached like a storm on the horizon. They would face it together, soldier, seer, and the man who was becoming something more.